I'm currently the chairperson of the outreach committee for the Alaska region, and probably for the last year and a half, I've solely been, well, not solely, but I have concentrated quite a bit on translations. So, and you know, to start off, like, and we read this at the beginning of this presentation, but part of the, there we go. Part of the why we do translations, it says in the first bullet point of our vision of NA services, our vision is that one day every addict in the world has a chance to experience our message in his or her own language and culture and find the opportunity for a new way of life. And the word that sticks out the most in that is culture, in their culture. So just a little brief history on what we've done up here in Alaska. So our first translation was put together by Doug P. Initiated the first translation into Yupik. Doug chose IP number 1 as the for the translation, and the original translation that went from English to Yupik was done by a professor out of the University of Fairbanks. And then when it came back, it was proofread and retranslated back to English by a professor at UAA, which is University of Anchorage. And one of the reasons why you don't have the same person do it is that some people have different interpretations when you do a language, and there can be different dialects. So it's always good that when doing translations that you have one person do one part of the translation and another person who they have no communication with whatsoever do the second part of the translation back to English. And that way you pick up little errors and you pick up little things in there by that. After we did that, it was sent off to NA.'s translation committee for them to review it, and they sent back a few things that they want us to check on. They go through it themselves, they hire a translator, and they have that translator look at it. After that, they did up a draft for us. They sent that back to Alaska, which was reviewed again. And we had some people that could speak Yupik read it, made sure it made sense to them. In 2018, 100 IPs were sent from NA.'s to Alaska, still in draft form, and we handed them out in what they call the Lower Kuskokwim area, which is the main Yupik-speaking area on the western side of Alaska. And we sent them up there, and we were invited to come up to their behavioral center facility they have up there and start up an NA meeting for them. And there's me and my only other committee member. The both of us are going to go up there. We're supposed to go in May, but because of this virus, it's been postponed for a little while. But we thought about it, you know, we're going up there, we got the IP. So we thought, well, when we go up there, you know, we're talking to these people and we're going to be meeting addicts for the first time up there. So in 2019, we did a translation of the welcome key tag into Yupik as well to take with us. So that's just a brief history of where we stand at the moment. We have other projects underway. One of them is in the Inupiaq language, and the other one is in, we're trying to do was in Tlingit. And I'll get back to them a little bit later. So local translation committee, you know, procedures. So the very first thing for any committee, there's a translation basics from NA.'s that you can get, which has all the information you will need for a translation committee. Step by step, it's awesome reading if you're going to get the translations, and so everything you need in there to walk you through it. Secondly, pick the literature that you want to translate. Like I said, Doug chose IP number 1, and that was a huge undertaking just to do that one IP. So I couldn't imagine what it would be like to try and do a basic text. The amount of time that it took just to get that IP done. I forget the actual time, but I want to say it was 5 years or maybe even more than that. Investigate the culture that you want to work with and see that it's a viable project. So when we did the Yupik translation, the main thing we looked at is how often do they really use this language? Well, in the Yupik culture, they still use Yupik as their #1 language. If you go to a council meeting or you go to a local meeting in the villages, they use Yupik and then they translate to English. So it was a good thing to start off with this one. The other thing is, in Alaska at the moment, there's a big push to have all native languages retaught in schools in the villages. And in the lower Kuskokwim area, Yupik language is being retaught in the schools. And then also you've got to look at the amount of people that are actually speaking that language. It's been brought up before that, well, why do, most young people don't even speak the language. They use English as their first language. One of the things that we found, and I can only speak for Alaska, but if you're going to go into a village in Alaska and bring like Narcotics Anonymous in there, the people you want to first meet with, and it's a bit like when we do other PR presentations, you want to speak to the people that are most prevalent in that society. And in Alaska, it's the elders, and the elders are the ones that still speak it. And they have, in Alaska, they have tribal courts, and they speak their language. So having the literature in their language is a very good sign of respect to start with. And it also gives them something that they can read and then they can hand down to the younger generation. So that's one of the other things you need to look at as well. Enlist a professional translator or a person that can speak and write the language. Translations can be extremely expensive. I have one quote for a translation was $8,000. The first initial translation, after going back and reading a lot of stuff on this and that, is to sort of cut costs. We're trying to find people that can speak and write the language, to first get it from English into whatever, the language we're using. And currently one in Yupik, in Nupiaq. This is one that we're working on now. The second translation you do to go back to English is the one that should be done specifically by a professional person. So concentrate more on the spirit of the written message and less on the specific word. You'll never be able to translate word for word. And this is where a lot of communication is going to come in to it, is the meaning behind it. And there's something that you'll see a lot when you're doing translations, and that's this thing, this word here, conceptual fidelity, meaning similar scenario or meaning. A lot of the phrases that we have in our NA literature is pretty much slang to, it's to NA people. NA people know it. And even if we talk to someone outside of NA that speaks English, we can say some things and we'll go, what do you mean by that? So that's something that needs to be communicated really well between the translators and the committee. And here it is, communication, stay in touch with the translators, the culture that you're dealing with, and the committee. It's a long process. It takes quite a long time to get through all this. There's a lot of backwards and forwards going between NAS and the LTC and to the culture. And I'll show you another slide here, just a real simple thing like the welcome key tag, the amount of times we went backwards and forwards on that. So, and then there was Tom, who said he didn't know anything slower than the Department of Corrections. Well, I do. Literature is probably one that's going to teach you a lot of patience, because it does take quite a bit of time to get this stuff done. Just to find the people out there that can help you with the translations. We've started up a few times with people, and then they've turned around to us and said, no, we don't want to do it for one reason or another. So that's only a very, very small part of the procedures. Like I said, in the translation basics, there's a ton of information. And if you're starting up a LTC, then the first thing you should do is sit down and already go through that. So here's just some slides and some stuff that was done. So this is a key tag translation into UPIC. So here's one of the things that we found. A lot of the languages have singular and plural, just like us. And so welcome. The original translation we got was Kwayana Tuluchi. And we thought, great, Kwayana Tuluchi, that's good. But then talking to another translator, they said, well, you know, if you're addressing just the person you're giving it to, it should be Kwayana Tuluchun, because that's just for one person. So they're the types of things you go backwards and forwards on to make sure that you get the right translation. And some people, you might get a translator to do that, and they'll just say Kwayana Tuluchi, and that's the translation for it, and not look at the, you know, that's addressing many. And they don't know when they say what our key tag says welcome, they don't know we're just going to give it to one person. And then the just for today, there's no writing for just for today in UPIC. Yamanic Kickman or Kinkman is all day. So, you know, that's again where you're looking to make sure that the translation you're doing is also in their culture, but it still has a very similar meaning to what we have in our written word, as far as in English. So here is one of the things that we got from the translation board down there, the glossaries, and this is where it comes in when we're talking about concentrate more on the, you know, not so much on the specific word, but on the meaning. So when you come to, you know, when you're doing a translation, you're searching for a fearless moral inventory. How do they translate that? Now, doing the Tlingit translation, when the translator came back to me, he said, you know, when I translate this, if I translate it back to English, it's going to sound like we're school children. And I went, but that's not ours. We're only looking for the meaning of it. And we don't want it to mean in English. We want you to understand it in your culture. So that's where it becomes really important to communicate with the people that are doing the translation and with the culture that you're in. So the translation board, NOS translation board will send you this, and you can go through that and pick out all the words. And then they also have this other one as well, which will give you the term or phrase. You know, you get how it's used in a sentence, different references, an explanation, and approved variations that it's already been translated into. And you can look at these translations and you can see how it's worked out. Now, for instance, in Russia, I believe it is, yeah, it's Russia. In Russian, they don't have a word for clean. So they don't use clean, they use purify or purity is their word for that. So this type of information is priceless when you're doing the translation. You can send this to the translator so they can look at it as well. They get a good idea of what we're meaning, you know, that we do actually want them to be able to read it and have it in their culture and not so much in ours. So here is the number one IP in UPIC. And as you can see, it's a lot of words. And in all this is a draft form, but in all literature that comes back from NOS, when it's translated, it'll still have Narcotics Anonymous in English, and it'll have all the wording that's on all our literature in there, and the registered trademarks. I mean, that will always be on there. But that's the first part of it, and that's the second part of the IP number one. And you can see, you know, from, if you look at how it's all squished in there, there's a lot of backwards and forwards and working out stuff there. And I personally haven't had it read to me, but the other person that's on my committee had 2 addicts read this to her, and she said it brought her to tears because she's a native girl that doesn't speak a lot of Yupik, but these people are, and they read it and it came out just great for them. So that makes you feel warm when it comes like here is just a brief, this is an idea of what Alaska is. So Yupik is in yellow here, it takes up this area. Our next project is Inupiaq, which is the top part of Alaska up here. And again, in Inupiaq, they use that as their main language. The University of Barrow, which is right at the top of Alaska, they have a cultural department which teaches Inupiaq and the Inupiaq culture in the university. They've in schools, they teach it again in schools as a primary language. So that's our next one that we're working on, and we're working with the university up there. And this is one thought we came up with, and if anyone's thinking about doing it, there's a cultural class up there, and for a project for them, I've talked to the professor up there, and as a project for them, we're going to give them the IP number 1 and have them translate it into Inupiaq. And that way, the hardest part is to first get it into the language that you want to do. That seems to be the hardest part from my experience so far. And then you can always take it to a translator, pay the money, and get it transferred back. Of course, we would still pay them, you know, whatever we work out with them, how we're going to do that with the university up there. So that's the next one. And then after that, we have Athabascan, which is basically the whole interior part of Alaska. The thing about Athabascan language, it has a lot of different dialects, but there are 2 dialects that they speak the most of, which is mostly on the top part. Down the bottom, they have all these little dialects, but up in the middle, they have Quechin and Kingman is the 2 languages that they use. And then down on the southeast, we have the Tlingit and the other languages. On the Aleutian chain, we have the Aleuts culture. Now, the Aleuts is probably a language you'd never be able to translate into, because their written language, a lot of it is art. It's pictures. It's a bit like the Aboriginals in Australia. They have the dream time. The Aleuts have a very similar thing. And so to do any translation there would be extremely hard. So that's about it. I thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to do this. I've never been asked to share what I like to do in Narcotics Anonymous. This is the first time. So I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.